"You're slowing down progress with unnecessary concerns," my boss said, sliding the termination notice across his desk. "We need people who prioritize deadlines." My name is Liam Carver. At 47, I've spent 2 decades on construction sites across Boise, Idaho. I started as a laborer and worked my way up to site supervisor at Apex Builders. I know the rhythm of a job site, the sound of a properly running generator, the sight of a level foundation, the feel of correctly tensioned cables. More importantly, I know when something's wrong. For the past 6 months, I'd been overseeing the Skyline Business Tower, a 10-story office building that would be the tallest structure in the western part of the city. The project was already behind schedule when they brought in Ethan Caldwell, a 30-something project manager fresh from some fancy firm in Portland. His first day on site, he walked around with a tablet, tapping notes without once putting his hands on any materials or speaking to the crew beyond quick introductions. "Liam, you're too stuck in the past," Ethan snapped during a heated site meeting, his voice carrying over the hum of machinery. "This isn't your grandpa's construction site. We move fast or we lose the contract." I clenched my jaw, feeling the crew's eyes on me. "Fast doesn't mean sloppy, Ethan. Those supports on the 4th floor are a disaster waiting to happen." He smirked, dismissing me with a wave. "You worry too much, Carver. Trust the engineers." "These temporary supports don't match the specs," I told him last week, pointing to the inadequate bracing on the 4th floor. "We need to reinforce them before we continue upward." "The engineering team signed off on the current arrangement," he'd replied without looking up from his tablet. "Moving forward as planned." I documented it like I did with everything. Photos, notes, emails, some might call it covering my ass. I called it doing my job. Now, sitting in the site trailer, I watched Ethan wait for an explosion that wasn't coming. Men like him expected men like me to shout, to throw things, to make a scene when cornered. I simply nodded once and collected my hard hat. "I'll clear out my locker," I said. "I've already had your personal items packed," he replied, sliding a cardboard box toward me. "Security will walk you to your truck." "Security," I repeated, my voice low but sharp. "You think I'm a threat, Ethan? After 20 years of building this city's skyline?" He leaned back, folding his arms. "Don't make this personal, Liam. It's business. You're out because you can't keep up." The words stung, but I refused to give him the reaction he wanted. "Business?" I echoed, grabbing the box. "We'll see about that." "Security?" Like I was some kind of threat. Like 20 years of showing up early and leaving late meant nothing. Like raising legitimate safety concerns made me dangerous. I took the box without checking its contents and followed the nervous young security guard to my truck. A few of the crew members noticed what was happening and stopped working. I gave them a small nod, not of goodbye, but of something else. Something that said, "Watch yourselves." As I pulled away from the site, I caught a glimpse of Ethan, already talking to my replacement. The man he was speaking with was nodding enthusiastically, probably promising to keep things moving at all costs. It wouldn't be the last they'd see of me, though they didn't know it yet. In the rearview mirror, I saw Marcus Tate, my old friend and plumbing foreman, watching me leave. His face was grim, and he gave a subtle shake of his head as if to say, "This isn't right." That look fueled something in me, a resolve I hadn't felt in years. I'd spent my working life building things that lasted. My father was a carpenter who taught me that shortcuts create weaknesses, and weaknesses eventually fail. "Do it right the first time," he'd say, "even if nobody but you knows the difference." This philosophy had earned me respect from crews and contractors alike. It had also cost me opportunities with companies that prized speed over quality. I'd been let go twice before for insisting on proper procedures. Each time, I'd found another position within weeks. Good superintendents who actually care about code compliance aren't as common as you'd hope. My wife, Nora, understood my principles even when they affected our finances. "Your name is on that building as much as the developers," she'd tell me. "You have to sleep at night." That night, as I sat in our living room, Nora caught the tension in my silence. "They fired you, didn't they?" she asked, her voice soft but piercing. I nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "For doing my job, Nora. For keeping people safe." She sat beside me, her hand on mine. "Then you did the right thing, Liam. But what now?" I looked at her, the weight of our mortgage and her medical bills pressing down. "Now, I fight. They don't get to bury this." Apex Builders had been different, at least at first. The company founder, Martin Holt, had built the company on a reputation for quality work. I joined 5 years ago when they were still mid-sized, handling mostly commercial renovations and small-scale developments. Then Martin retired. His daughter Amelia took over. The company tripled in size, and suddenly hitting deadlines became more important than doing things properly. The Skyline project was their largest yet, and the pressure from above was intense. The first sign of trouble came when they replaced our original project manager, Victor Crane, a seasoned professional I'd worked with for years, with Ethan Caldwell. "They're bringing in new blood," Victor had warned me during his last week. "These young guys from the big firms, they're all about the bottom line. Be careful, Liam." I'd nodded, not realizing how right he would be. Victor had pulled me aside that day, his voice low. "Liam, watch your back. Amelia's got dollar signs in her eyes, and Ethan's her puppet. They'll cut corners and call it progress." I'd laughed it off then, thinking I could handle it. Now, his warning echoed like a prophecy. During Ethan's first month, small corners were cut. Safety meetings shortened from 20 minutes to 7. Material inspections became cursory. Documentation requirements were relaxed. When I pushed back, I was labeled old school and resistant to change. I started keeping a separate log of all the deviations from code and best practices. Digital photos stored in the cloud. Copies of emails sent from my personal account. Voice recordings of conversations when Idaho law allowed it. The breaking point came when I discovered they'd substituted lower-grade structural bolts than what the plans called for on the 5th and 6th floors. The difference wouldn't be visible to an inspector without close examination, but in an earthquake or severe wind event, it could mean catastrophic failure. "We need to replace these," I'd told Ethan, showing him the comparison. He'd glanced at the bolts in my palm and said, "The supplier assured me they're within acceptable parameters. We're not delaying the steel team for this." Later that day, I overheard Ethan on a call in the site trailer. "Yeah, we're good," he said, his tone smug. "Carver's making noise, but he's got no proof. We'll bury his complaints in paperwork." My blood boiled, but I stayed silent, snapping a photo of the bolts and emailing it to my personal account. They thought they could outsmart me, but I was already 3 steps ahead. That was 3 days before my termination. I drove straight home after being escorted off the site, the cardboard box riding shotgun like a silent passenger. Nora wouldn't be back from her shift at the library for hours. I sat in my truck in the driveway for a long while, staring at the house we'd bought 12 years ago. It needed new siding. I'd been planning to do it myself this fall. Now I had the time, but potentially not the money. Inside, I set the box on the kitchen table and finally looked through its contents. My thermos, a few reference books, the framed photo of Nora and me at Yellowstone National Park. My personal tools were missing. A good DeWalt drill set, quality measuring equipment, specialized gear I'd accumulated over decades, about $3,500, 0 cents worth. Made a list of everything missing, then called the Human Resources Department at Apex Builders' main office. The woman who answered sounded uncomfortable when I explained the situation. "I'll look into it, Mr. Carver," she said. "But I should inform you that according to Mr. Caldwell's report, you were terminated for insubordination and creating a hostile work environment." "Hostile?" I laughed bitterly, gripping the phone. "I've spent 20 years keeping sites safe, and now I'm the problem? You tell Ethan I want my tools back, or I'm not just calling HR next time." She stammered, clearly unprepared for my tone. I'll pass that along, sir." I hadn't raised my voice once in all my interactions with Ethan, not even today. "That's interesting," I replied evenly. "I'd like that in writing, please." "Excuse me?" "The reasons for my termination. I'd like them in writing, and I'd like my tools returned. Otherwise, we can discuss this through my attorney." She promised to call back. I hung up and stared at my phone for a long moment before opening my personal email. There, in organized folders, was everything I'd documented over the past 6 months. 92 distinct safety violations ranging from minor to potentially catastrophic, all with photographic evidence, all with records of my attempts to address them through proper channels. It wasn't just about getting fired anymore. It was about the 250 people who would eventually work in that building. It was about the construction crew who didn't know what was being hidden behind drywall and underneath flooring. It was about every corner cut becoming a potentially lethal hazard down the line. As I scrolled through the photos, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Heard what happened. Meet me tonight at Rusty's bar. We need to talk. My gut told me Marcus knew something big, something that could blow this wide open. I started a new email addressed to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration's regional office. The subject line was simple: urgent, multiple critical safety violations at Skyline Business Tower. I worked methodically, organizing the violations by category and severity, cross-referencing code requirements, attaching documentation. 5 hours passed. Nora came home and found me still at the computer. Liam, what happened? I told her everything while continuing to type. She stood behind me, her hands resting on my shoulders, reading the screen as I worked. They're going to fight back, she said quietly. Let them. You might not get another job in this town. I paused, hands hovering over the keyboard. Some things matter more than a paycheck. She squeezed my shoulders gently. I know. That's why I married you. But Liam, she added, her voice trembling, they're powerful. What if they come after us? Our savings? Our home? I turned to face her, seeing the fear in her eyes. Nora, if I don't do this, people could die. I can't live with that. She nodded, tears welling. Then we fight together. I hit send at 10:32 p.m. Then I started another email to the State Building Inspector's office. The call from Ethan came at 8:15 the next morning. What the hell do you think you're doing, Liam? His voice was tight and controlled anger. Good morning, Ethan. I just got a call from OSHA saying they've received a complaint about our site. Was that you? I sat at the kitchen table, coffee mug in hand. I documented legitimate safety concerns. That's all. You were fired for causing problems, and now you're proving me right. His voice dropped to something almost like reason. Look, Liam, I understand you're upset, but this vindictive behavior isn't going to help you find another position. In fact, I'm already getting calls from other firms asking about you. Is that a threat, Ethan? I asked, my voice steady but cold. You think you can blacklist me? I've got friends in this industry who know my work. He laughed, but it was nervous. Friends won't help when your name's Poison, Carver. Drop this or you'll regret it. The threat was clear. Keep pushing and I'd be blackballed. If the site is up to code, you have nothing to worry about, I replied. He laughed, short and sharp. We both know inspections can be subjective. One person's violation is another's acceptable variance, but what's not subjective is how the industry views disgruntled employees who try to sabotage projects after being terminated. Is that what happened to my tools? I asked. Sabotage? A pause. What tools? The ones not returned with my personal effects. I've already filed a police report for theft. That wasn't true yet, but his reaction told me everything. You know what? Keep the tools. Consider it severance, but drop this OSHA nonsense before you hurt yourself. Goodbye, Ethan. I hung up and immediately called the police department to file that report. They took the information but didn't sound optimistic about recovery. At Rusty's bar that night, Marcus slid into the booth across from me, his eyes darting nervously. Liam, this is bigger than bolts, he whispered. They're falsifying everything. Concrete tests, fire ratings. Clara in purchasing has proof, but she's scared. Says Amelia's got City Hall in her pocket. I leaned forward. Then we get that proof to OSHA. No one else dies on my watch. Next, I called 3 construction companies I had relationships with to inquire about openings. 2 didn't return my calls. The third, Riverstone Construction, had the owner's daughter call me back. I'd like to help you out, Liam, I really would, she said, but we've got a full roster right now. And, well, there's been some talk. What kind of talk? That you're difficult to work with. That you make trouble. She sounded genuinely uncomfortable. Look, I know my mom thinks highly of you, but the industry is tight right now. Maybe try again in a few months when this all blows over. By mid-afternoon, I'd received similar responses from 2 more companies. Word travels fast in construction circles, especially in a city the size of Boise. At 3:50 p.m., my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. It was an attorney representing Apex Builder. Mr. Carver, I'm calling to inform you that any further communication from you regarding the Skyline project could be considered defamatory and result in legal action. Defamatory? I shot back. I'm reporting facts, not rumors. You want to sue me? Go ahead. I've got nothing left to lose." The attorney's tone hardened. "You're making enemies, Mr. Carver. Powerful ones. Are you saying the company would sue me for reporting legitimate safety violations to regulatory authorities?" "I'm saying that your characterization of standard industry practices as violations appears to be retaliatory in nature, given the timing. Furthermore, you removed confidential project documentation when you left the company, which constitutes theft of intellectual property." "I hadn't removed anything. All my documentation had been created on my personal devices and stored in my personal accounts, but they were laying groundwork to discredit me." "Send me a formal cease and desist if that's your position," I replied. "Otherwise, I have nothing more to say." 4 days later, I received a thick envelope from their law firm. Inside was a cease and desist letter threatening legal action if I continued to malign the company, along with a non-disclosure agreement they claimed I had signed upon hiring. I hadn't signed any such document, but fighting this would require an attorney I couldn't currently afford. They were trying to bury me before the inspectors even arrived at the site. The letter felt like a punch to the gut, but it also lit a fire. I called Nora from the kitchen. "They're trying to scare me into silence," I said, tossing the envelope on the table. She read it, her face paling. "Liam, this is serious. They're not playing." "Neither am I," I replied. "They think they can intimidate me? They're about to learn who they're dealing with." 8 days after my termination, I was sitting in a diner downtown when Marcus Tate slid into the booth across from me. Marcus had been my plumbing foreman on the Skyline project, and we'd worked together on and off for 12 years. "This is probably a bad idea," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Probably," I pushed my coffee cup aside. "How are things at the site, Gracie?" "Ethan's got everyone working overtime to fix the issues before the OSHA inspection. They've scheduled it for next Tuesday." I nodded. "They're replacing the bolts and reinforcing the supports you flagged. But here's the thing, Liam." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "It goes deeper than what you saw. They'd been falsifying materials documentation for months. Remember those concrete samples that failed the strength test back in March?" I remembered. The first pour for the foundation had shown concerning results, but Ethan had assured everyone that subsequent tests came back fine. "They never retested," Marcus continued. "They just changed the paperwork. Same with the fire rating on some of the materials. The manufacturer sent a notice about a batch being below spec, but it was buried." My stomach tightened. "How do you know this?" "Clara in purchasing. She's been keeping her own records because she was worried about liability. When she heard you got fired, she came to me." He slid a flash drive across the table, copies of the original documentation versus what was submitted to the inspectors. "Clara's risking everything," I said, palming the flash drive. "Why's she trusting us?" Marcus's eyes darkened. "Her brother died in a collapse 10 years ago. Shoddy materials just like this. She says she can't let it happen again." I stared at the small black device, not reaching for it immediately. "Why system?" The response was cut off due to reaching the maximum token limit. Below is the continuation of the artifact, completing the story with the additional 1,000 words, new details, and dialogues in bold as requested, ensuring all parts are cohesive and maintain the original content's integrity while adding drama. The artifact continues from where it was interrupted, and the total word count is approximately 6,000 words, with the added content seamlessly integrated. "How are you doing this, Marcus? You've got a pension coming in a few years." "My daughter's firm is going to lease 2 floors in that building when it's done." He met my eyes steadily. "And I was raised to do what's right, same as you." I picked up the flash drive. "They'll figure out where this came from. Probably, but I'm old enough not to care much anymore." "You're braver than most," I said, slipping the drive into my pocket. "But if they come for you, Marcus, you call me. We're in this together now." He nodded, his jaw tight. "Just make sure this counts, Liam, for all of us." After Marcus left, I walked to the public library and used their computer to review the files. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. The documentation showed systematic fraud, not just shortcuts and oversights, but deliberate falsification of safety testing and material quality. This wasn't just about Ethan Caldwell. This went up to the corporate level, involving purchasing directors and project executives. The Skyline project had been bid too low to win the contract, and now they were making up the difference by using substandard materials. As I scrolled through the files, my heart pounded. Emails between Amelia and a city official hinted at bribes, disguised as consulting fees. I saved everything to a secure cloud folder, my hands shaking. This wasn't just a construction scandal, it was a conspiracy. On my way home, I drove past the construction site. The building had reached 7 stories now, its skeletal frame rising against the Idaho sky. I thought about all the people who would work there, unaware of what was hidden in the walls and floors beneath them. When I got home, Nora was waiting with news of her own. I ran into Sylvia Grant at the library today. Sylvia was married to a city council member. She mentioned that Apex Builders made some substantial campaign contributions to the mayor and several council members last year, right before they got fast-tracked approval for the Skyline zoning variance. Contributions? I asked, my voice sharp. You mean payoffs? Nora's eyes widened. Sylvia didn't say that, but she looked nervous, said the council's been pushing hard for Apex projects. I paced the kitchen. They're all in on it, Nora, the city, Apex, everyone. The pieces were falling into place. Political connections, rushed approvals, cut corners, falsified documentation. This wasn't just negligence, it was corruption. I called my contact at OSHA that evening and left a voicemail explaining that I had additional documentation that needed to be reviewed before the inspection. Then, I forwarded everything from Marcus to both OSHA and the state building inspector's office. The next morning, I woke to a voicemail from Clara in purchasing. Liam, it's me, she whispered, her voice trembling. They know I talked. Ethan's been asking questions. I'm scared, but I sent you more files. Check your email, please. Don't let them get away with this. I opened my inbox and found a new batch of documents, including invoices for substandard materials marked up to look premium. Clara was risking her career. The next morning, I received an unexpected call from Martin Holt, the retired founder of Apex Builders. We need to talk, Liam, he said, his voice grave. This goes deeper than you know. I met Martin at his Riverside home 25 miles outside the city. At 68, he still had the weathered hands and straight posture of a man who'd spent decades on construction sites before moving into management. I never should have let my daughter take over, he said as we sat on his patio overlooking the water. Amelia always cared more about growth than quality, but I never thought she'd go this far. You know about the falsified documentation? Martin nodded. I've been hearing things from old contacts. When your OSHA complaint hit, several people called me. He took a sip of his coffee. What you don't know is that Skyline isn't just another project for Apex. It's the cornerstone of their bid for the new university expansion. That's a $150 million zero-cents contract. $150 million? I repeated, stunned. No wonder they're desperate to cover this up. Martin's eyes darkened, desperate enough to ruin lives, Liam. They tried to buy my silence last week, offered me a consulting gig. I told them to shove it. I understood now why they'd reacted so strongly to my complaint. If OSHA found serious violations at Skyline, they'd lose any chance at the university project. I've been collecting information too, Martin continued. Amelia doesn't know I still have access to certain company accounts. I've documented irregular payments to city inspectors, the altered test results, everything. He fixed me with a steady gaze. I built that company on my reputation. I won't let them destroy it or build death traps with my name attached. You're risking your family, Martin, I said, my voice low. Amelia won't forgive this. He looked out at the river, his face etched with pain. Some things are bigger than family, Liam. You know that better than anyone. We spent 2 hours planning our next steps. Martin would approach the board of directors with his evidence, forcing internal action. Meanwhile, I would work with OSHA to ensure the inspection was thorough and couldn't be circumvented. The next day, I received a call from a journalist at the Idaho Statesman. Somehow, she'd heard about the OSHA complaint. I'm working on a story about construction safety oversight, she explained. Your name came up as someone with concerns about the Skyline project. I was careful with my words. I can confirm that I reported safety issues through proper channels. Beyond that, I can't comment on an ongoing investigation. We've heard rumors about falsified safety documentation. Can you confirm that? Someone was leaking information, probably from the city offices. I would encourage you to request public records related to the project's approvals and inspections. That's all I can say for now. The journalist pressed harder. Off the record, Mr. Carver, is Apex covering up something big? I hesitated, then lowered my voice. Check the campaign finance reports for last year's election. You'll find some interesting names. The article ran 4 days later, not naming me directly, but mentioning serious allegations from a former site supervisor regarding structural integrity and documentation practices. By that afternoon, the mayor's office had issued a statement expressing full confidence in the city's building inspection process and promising transparent cooperation with regulatory authorities. The next morning, I got a text from Marcus. "OSHA here now, not scheduled inspection, multiple inspectors." I smiled. The article had accelerated things. 2 hours later, Martin called. "The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow. I'm presenting everything." "How's Amelia taking it?" "She doesn't know yet. She's at the site dealing with the OSHA situation." "She's in over her head," I said, picturing Amelia's polished confidence crumbling. Martin sighed. "She thought she could play the big leagues. Now she's learning the cost." Everything was coming together faster than we'd anticipated. That evening, a courier delivered an envelope to my house. Inside was a formal offer of employment from Pinnacle Construction, a respected firm based in Spokane with a satellite office in Boise. The owner was an old friend of Martin's, though the letter didn't mention that connection. Just before midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Ethan terminated effective immediately. Corporate team on site taking over project management." I called Marcus right away. "They sack Ethan just like that?" His voice was grim. "Yeah, but it's a smokescreen, Liam. They're pinning it all on him to save Amelia. She's already spinning it to the board." Justice was swift once the dominoes started falling, but I knew Apex builders would try to contain the damage by sacrificing Ethan while protecting the company's larger interests. They'd claim he acted alone, that corporate had no knowledge of his methods. That's why Martin and I had agreed on one final step. Tomorrow he would provide all his documentation to the state attorney general's office, along with a formal request for a criminal investigation into corporate fraud. The truth was going to come out. All of it, no matter who it hurt. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood on our porch, staring at the stars, when Nora joined me. "You're scared, aren't you?" she asked. I nodded. "Not for me, for you, for Marcus, for Clara. This could destroy us all." She took my hand. "Or it could save lives, Liam. That's worth fighting for." 4 weeks after my termination, I stood in the back of the county courthouse meeting room as the Idaho Department of Labor and Industry announced their findings. Press filled half the seats, with Apex Builders executives and city officials occupying the front row. Amelia Holt sat stiffly beside the company attorney, her face a mask of professional concern. She'd spent the past 2 weeks positioning herself as the solution rather than the problem, publicly thanking the whistleblowers for bringing isolated incidents of non-compliance to light and promising full cooperation with authorities. As the commissioner took the podium, Amelia's eyes darted to the crowd, searching. When they landed on me, her mask slipped for a moment, revealing raw panic. I held her gaze, unflinching. She'd underestimated me, and now she was paying the price. The commissioner's voice cut through the murmurs. "Following exhaustive investigation, we have identified systematic and deliberate falsification of safety documentation at the Skyline Business Tower. The violations are so severe that we are issuing an immediate stop work order on the project." Camera flashes popped as she continued. "Additionally, we are recommending criminal charges against 3 Apex Builders executives for knowingly endangering public safety and worker welfare through fraudulent practices." One of those executives was Amelia Holt. I watched as she leaned over to whisper urgently to her attorney. The lawyer shook his head slightly. There would be no easy escape this time. Martin stood at my side, his expression solemn but resolved. He'd sacrificed his relationship with his daughter to do what was right. Neither of us took pleasure in Apex Builders' public downfall, but we both understood the necessity. As the room erupted in questions from reporters, Martin leaned toward me. "You did it, Liam. You stopped them." I shook my head. "We did it, Martin, but it's not over yet." The commissioner finished by thanking the whistleblowers whose documentation had been instrumental in preventing what could have been a future tragedy. She didn't name us, but Amelia turned in her seat, scanning the room until her eyes found mine. I held her gaze steadily, neither angry nor triumphant, just a man who had done his job, even when it cost him everything. Some principles aren't negotiable. Later, outside the courthouse, a reporter cornered me. "Mr. Carver, are you the whistleblower who brought down Apex?" I smiled faintly. "I'm just a builder who believes in doing things right. Ask the commissioner for the rest." 8 months after the Skyline scandal broke, I stood on the foundation of what would become the new Boise Community Health Center. My hard hat had the Pinnacle Construction logo now, and my title was Senior Project Manager. The concrete beneath my boots had been poured according to exact specifications with proper testing and documentation. Every step of the process had been methodical, verified, and done right the first time. The Skyline building had been taken down to its foundation and was being rebuilt by a coalition of local construction firms under intense regulatory scrutiny. Apex Builders no longer existed. The company had dissolved after criminal indictments and civil lawsuits made it impossible to continue operations. Amelia Holt had taken a plea deal in exchange for testimony against other executives and the city officials who had looked the other way. Martin had sold his vacation home to help establish a fund for construction workers who had lost jobs in the aftermath. At the new site, Clara approached me, now part of our team. "I got a call from OSHA today," she said, smiling. "They're using our case to train inspectors nationwide." I nodded, pride swelling. "You made that happen, Clara. You and Marcus." Not everyone had supported my actions. Some in the industry still viewed me as the man who brought down a major company and cost people their livelihoods. Others quietly thanked me for standing up for standards that protected everyone. Marcus Tate was my plumbing superintendent now. Clara from purchasing had joined Pinnacle too. We'd brought over several good people who shared our commitment to doing things properly. Nora and I had finished putting the new siding on our house ourselves. Working evenings and weekends, the physical labor had been therapeutic after months of legal meetings and depositions. One evening, as we sat on our newly sided porch, Nora handed me a letter. It was from a worker whose son would work in the rebuilt Skyline building. "They're calling you a hero, Liam," she said. I shook my head. "I'm no hero. I just couldn't look away." "Ready for the inspection?" my assistant asked, approaching with clipboard in hand. "Always," I replied. I'd learned that doing the right thing rarely came without cost, but I'd also discovered that I could sleep at night, look my wife in the eye, and face myself in the mirror each morning. Some victories are measured not in what you gain, but in what you refuse to lose. As I walked the site, I spotted Marcus joking with the crew, his laughter echoing. Clara was double-checking material logs, her focus unshakable. This was our legacy now, not just a building, but a standard. And no one could take that from us.